Content warning. Episodes of Grey Matter may contain themes and depictions of extreme mental illness, traumatic bodily harm, and death. If you aren't in the right headspace to engage with those depictions right now, maybe this episode should wait for another time. Otherwise, proceed with caution.
Welcome back to Grey Matter. I know that look, that grit and determination in your eyes. You're here for the thrilling conclusion to our unexpected epic. But before you get it, I want to ask you something. A third question to go with our third act. What character trait is the most responsible for making mankind the dominant creature on this tiny little Earth? Is it ruthlessness, ingenuity, the ability to rationalize and dismiss the connection between our actions and their consequences? Or is it cooperation? Mankind is capable of some amazing feats when working in tandem, so why does it seem so difficult to get us on the same page? How can the same world that sent man to the moon continue to salt and burn the earth, even as we choke on the clouds of smoke and drown in the poisoned water? In times of crisis, when humanity needs unity the most, it seems to come the hardest. Is there a fundamental fear we all carry of a loss of personal identity for the benefit of the crowd, or are we simply afraid of being seen as we are? Maybe in times of crisis, we all grab on tightly to whatever we think we can hold, no matter how badly it hurts us. The impulse may be as natural, as biological, as any of our other drives. This is the ignominiously named War of the Worlds Part 3, and it's about the strength of the structures humanity builds. Which ones can withstand the ultimate stress test? What, or who, will be left standing in the rubble at the end? And what, if anything, will they be left holding? War of the Worlds, Part 3, Paradise Lost. Written and directed by Jonathan Inbody, and adapted from the novel The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
I can't see, Matt. The headlights are too bright.
Just wait 2 seconds, Kay. There.
What about the lights from town?
We'll just have to hope they're far enough to block it out. Come on, I'll bet we can see better without the windshield in the way.
What are you so smiley about?
I don't know, it's kind of romantic, isn't it? Sitting on the hood of the car and watching for falling stars.
Are you going to sit on the hood?
Would you rather stand?
Look! There's one.
I think that's a plane.
What? Why?
The color, more than anything. It's sort of flashing red. Is that what meteors look like?
It's not red, it's yellowish. But it's not moving like a plane. And it's going... Look at that. It's beautiful.
Trust me, I know.
I said look at that, not at me.
I can't help myself, you're distracting.
Oh, shut up.
You don't really want me to, though, do you?
No, I don't mind. I don't know what you think is so good to look at, but promise me you won't stop seeing it, okay?
I never could. We sat out there for another hour, parked somewhere with a view on the side of the road up in the hills above town. And the whole time, the ring was burning a hole in my pocket. I don't know why I couldn't just bring myself to take it out, get down on one knee, do the thing people do in the movies, and have a story to tell the grandkids. But I just couldn't. I wasn't unsure, really. Not of us, not of Kay. She was the best thing that had ever happened to me. So why couldn't I do it? Eventually, the night got too chilly and we headed back home, but by the time we went to bed, the coldest thing that night were still my feet. There'd be more chances, I knew that, but what kind of night would ever be that perfect again? And how could I have known that it might have been the last? I got up early for work and kissed Kay goodbye, gently telling her to go back to sleep when she started to stir. The way Michelle was working her at the diner, she deserved as much rest as she could get. And I thought Michelle's old man was tough on us. I passed through town on my way up to the mine, where a pillar of smoke was rising up from a glowing crater in the middle of the park. There were a few people there, a couple of cops and firemen, so I just kept driving. Fallen star. Somebody must have made a wish. Hell, I know what I'd wish for. Some guts. Austin's truck was already in the parking lot when I got to the mine, and when I got to the locker room, I could hear him showering. As I got my gear on, I heard the shower switch off, and in a second, he came strolling into the locker room with a towel around his waist.
Bright and early, huh?
You should talk, Ace. Did you sleep here last night?
Look, I was pretty hammered, all right. This was closer to the bar than home, and there's less cops up this way. Besides, I sleep better in a truck than in a bed. I got too used to sleeping in Humvees in Somalia. Anyway, what are you doing here this early? Kay finally kick you out?
Couldn't sleep much.
Why? Did she say no?
Never popped the question. The ring stayed in my pocket the whole night. I think if I'm gonna marry her, then we've got to get out of here first. You've seen this place. Nothing survives in Horse Hill. Not businesses, not workers. Hell, people say you can't even drink the water.
And I thought I had commitment issues.
Don't worry, Austin. That's not one of the problems I have with you.
Just penis envy.
It wasn't long before the rest of our shift arrived, all abuzz with gossip from around town about the meteor that had crashed in the park. Someone said something about seeing falling stars on the news all over the world, but somebody else seemed 100% sure it was a hoax started by losers on the internet. Foreman Sayers chimed in to say his daughter was about to strike it rich, since her diner was right next to the park, and he brainstormed space-themed names for menu items for what felt like the next hour. We weren't far into the day's work when the explosion happened, and down in the mine, Austin and I didn't even hear it. We felt the ground shake, just a little, and saw some coal dust shower down from the top of the shaft, but we didn't think much of it until we came back to the surface for a water break half an hour later. No one was at the top of the elevator, or in the hall, and when we stepped outside the building, we saw a crowd gathered in the parking lot. Down the mountain, Horse Hill was in flames. Oh my God.
What the hell?
A distant truck came screaming up the winding road to the mountain, swerving back and forth erratically as it headed for the mine. It was Foreman Sayers. He took a wide, screeching turn into the parking lot, then spun out of control and slammed into a light pole. As the gathered crowd ran over, he flung the door open and staggered out. One leg sagged beneath his hip, misshapen and smoldering, and as he turned to look at me, I saw that the right side of his face had been horrifically burned. Where the skin hadn't charred and flaked away, bubbles of melted flesh sat in lumps, and his eye had been turned almost pure white by intense heat. Sayers lurched forward, and the crowd moved back. He looked at us with his good eye, scanning our faces, and opened his melted mouth to speak.
The meteor! The thing in the crater! It's alive! They all burned!
Sayers collapsed, and as the side of his head hit the blacktop, it caved in like a rotten pumpkin. A terrible silence hung over all of us, even as Austin went to his truck and returned with a tarp to cover the body. The rest of us looked down at the burning town, or at each other's horrified faces, or watched as smoke rose up around the edges of the tarp. No one knew what to do, or even what to say. And although we were surrounded by parked cars, no one reached into their pockets for their keys. In the distant town of Horse Hill, an ink-black shape like a bell tower lurched through the scattered buildings, flashing like a strobe as explosions rocked the streets. Austin, what's happening? You've been in the shit before. What is this? An attack?
I don't... Look out!
Austin grabbed the back of my shirt and pulled me along as a massive object plunged down into the parking lot. It smashed through the foreman's truck and left a burning crater in the concrete. And as the smoke cleared, I looked up to see holes in the clouds from where it had dropped. I started to move, then felt Austin's hand grab my forearm to hold me back. A few of the other workers slowly approached as the large, cylindrical shape sticking out of the crater smoldered and hissed, and when the rough shape's rigid exterior began to shift, one of them pulled his shirt off, then took off his white undershirt and held it up like a flag. He waved it back and forth, then looked back at the others.
It's a spaceship, right? There's people in there, or what passes for people where they're from. We gotta show them we're not gonna fight, that we're not gonna hurt them.
The top of the cylinder in the crater suddenly twisted, letting out a few jets of steam at its sides. One of them sprayed the man holding the undershirt, and the sound of sizzling flesh echoed out across the lot, along with a smell like burning bacon. The man screamed, stumbling backwards, and when he clutched his face, his hands seemed to sift through the flesh like seaweed. He toppled as the other men scrambled back, and behind him, pieces of the cylinder began to break free and fall to the ground. A slinking, half-liquid, chalk-white shape rolled out, then pooled in the crater and swelled up into a heaving, hulking beast. At the front of its face, a triangle of eye holes sat above an undersized beak, and as it swayed back and forth, countless tentacles writhed underneath its swollen body.
Holy shit. It really is.
What do we do? Do we try to kill it? A group of miners ran across the parking lot, shouting for the rest of us to follow as people scattered and ran for their cars. But Austin and I were frozen, staring at the growing creature through the rising steam as it began to pull pieces of the char-black cylinder in towards itself, then arranged them into strange shapes. Its eyes began to glow, then let out a burst of blinding white, and when it faded, 2 pieces of the cylinder had been welded together.
It's building something. We have to go. Now.
What? Where?
Into the mines. Come on.
I thought you were badass Mr. Army Man.
You got that wrong, Matt. I'm the guy that lives.
Austin, don't... let go of me, now! If things are happening, bad things, then I have to go find Kay.
No, listen to me. Hey! Think it over, dipshit. She's smarter than you. If she's down there, then she's either dead or running for her life. God willing, she found some place to hold up and wait it out. Like we need to do. If there's 2 of those things, there are more coming.
I stared past Austin as a towering black shape began to rise in the crater. He shook my shoulders, trying to jar me out of it, then turned to see what I was looking at as the shadow rolled over us. Underneath a massive, skeletal helmet with a gigantic lens at its center, 3 twisting crab legs trembled and swayed. Jets of steam burst out in intervals from slits between panels of glittering black armor, dotted and ridged like the shell of a lobster. It rose up like a vertical train car, its single eye glowing with pulsing light, and took a lurching step forward out of the crater, crushing a car underfoot. At the sound of a sudden crash behind us, I turned to see a huge vehicle plow through the trees and into the parking lot. It was one of the massive excavators from up the hill, the one its crew called the Thunderchild, and as it charged forward, crushing parked cars under its gigantic treads, the giant elongated saw at its front began to spin. In a second, the whir of the machine had risen to a trilling fever pitch, and the massive saw looked like a blur as it swung upward.
Hell yeah! Kill the son of a bitch!
Matt, get down!
The Thunderchild roared across the lot, the men inside it shouting and whooping, and after a second the tripod turned to face it. Its eye glowed brighter and brighter as it stumbled out of the edge of the crater, struggling to find its balance. It shot a concentrated blast of brilliant white energy at a lopsided angle, carving a smoldering line into the asphalt. Suddenly, the light flickered and died, and white-hot molten slag dripped out from under the bottom of the lens as the machine reared back up. The Thunderchild closed the distance as the alien machine tried to steady itself, its eye pulsing in uneven bursts like a dying light bulb. Then, as the excavator got close, the tripod reared up, jabbing one of its legs down like a spear at the approaching machine, as two tendrils lashed out from underneath its head. The tripod's leg sank into the back of the Thunderchild, sending up a shower of sparks. The man in the driver's seat threw himself into a massive lever, and the whirling excavation saw jolted up, punching through the underside of the tripod's armored head. The tripod shook violently as the saw pushed up into it, spraying out white, red, and black liquid as jets of steam burst out from the growing wound. Its tree trunk legs twitched and thrashed, swatting at the Thunderchild as it pushed the tripod back to the edge of the crater. The alien machine toppled and fell, and before it could recover, the Thunderchild's drill swung down and sawed through the front of the black metal helmet, cutting its skeletal face in half as an alien shriek echoed out across the parking lot. Then, all at once, the tripod sagged and went still. The Thunderchild's saw slowed to a stop, its teeth white-hot and almost entirely worn away, and I heard another cheer from the men inside as the excavator started to move back. I started to cheer too, running over as Austin tried to hold me back, and joined the crowd gathering around the Thunderchild. One of the crew emerged from the back and thrust his fists into the air, inspiring another flurry of whoops and hollers. I could see a smile on the driver's face as he checked the mirrors so that he could back the excavator up to bring it around. We had done it. We had really done it. 1-0 in favor of the human race. More points to follow. Another black shape rose up over the trees, this one even bigger than the last, striding up the mountain like a man on his way to stomp on ants at a picnic. Workers started to scatter as the crew of the Thunderchild rushed back to their posts, but when I looked up at the massive tripod's translucent eye, there were no signs of a growing light inside. With a series of thunks, tabs on the bottom of the tripod's head popped open and jets of heavy smoke poured out, cascading down onto the parking lot like clouds of pitch-black napalm. I turned and ran as the smoke billowed out, and I could hear screams from the men trapped inside as I desperately fled. I turned to look over my shoulder and saw the very top of the Thunderchild, where two men were frantically climbing up to stay above the smoke. Blood was pouring from their eyes, ears, noses, and mouths, and I watched as their limbs lost strength and their bodies dropped out of sight. Finally, the eye of the tripod began to glow, staring down at the hulking shadow of the excavator. And as its energy built, I knew that nothing but slag would be left when it had finished. Light shot down like the hammer of God, and a rippling shockwave blasted out through the lot, flipping cars and shattering windows. And the last thing I felt before everything went black were my feet leaving the ground.
Wait. Don't try to move.
Ace?
Yeah, it's me. Do you know how long you've been asleep? I didn't. I thought I was gonna lose you there for a minute.
What? What happened?
You got blasted into the side of the building. I think you tried to catch yourself. Your arm almost snapped in half. I dragged you back to the elevator, took us down into the mine. We're in the C shaft. Sorry about the quality of the splint. I didn't have much to work with down here. I told you not to move. The bone was sticking out. I had to shove it back in. You don't remember that? You were, well, I guess you were pretty messed up. You kept passing out. I wasn't sure if you were going to wake back up. Some of that might come back to you eventually. Probably better if it doesn't.
How long have I
don't know. Hours. It's probably 10 or 11, maybe midnight. I was gonna go up and check things out when the noises stopped, but I didn't want to leave you in case you woke up or... didn't. Christ, you really are gonna live through this, aren't you?
Don't sound like you're so surprised. Where's our respirators?
What's a little black lung between friends? I didn't have enough time to grab any of my gear on the way down. One more reason to go up. Either way, our lives have been ticking down since the first time we stepped foot in this mine. A couple more hours won't be the thing that kills us.
I'm going with you.
Course you are. Just as soon as you can walk.
We lost, didn't we?
Nothing lasts forever.
But why are you so calm about this?
I'm in shock. So are you. We'll feel it a lot more tomorrow. Besides, this is what war is, Matt. This is what it feels like. It's hell, and everybody's going. It's not just something that happens to other people.
But it doesn't happen here. He waited as I regained my strength, and when I was strong enough to walk, he helped me tie a sling for my broken arm and hobble over to the elevator. We rode up in silence, then quietly walked through the building, checking each room for survivors. When we didn't find any, Austin raided the lockers and break room in search of food, and stacked what he found next to the elevator for when we got back. Then, he led me over to a narrow stairwell. We walked up the concrete stairs and pushed through the door at the top to step out onto the roof. Underneath us, smashed and overturned cars were scattered around the half-destroyed parking lot, where a few weak lights flickered at the end of bent and melted poles. Austin pointed down the twisting road to the town of Horse Hill, where distant fires illuminated the crumbling remains of buildings. Past it, the dull glow of further destruction sat on the horizon. I missed my chance to get her out of here, Austin. We should have just packed our bags and left years ago. And now it's too late. She always said this town was going to kill me, and now... What is that? That burning dot. Past town, out in the distance.
It's Wheeling.
They're in the city?
They're everywhere, man. There's a radio down in the shaft. I was listening to it when you were asleep. New York, Washington, Los Angeles. They're all gone. Those things flattened them like a steamroller. There, look. You see that line on the highway? That's people running for their lives. If we watch long enough, I'll bet we'll see some of those walking smokestacks come pick them off.
What about everyone in town?
You see any crowds moving on those roads?
No. What are those things, Austin? Is it really... Are they really...
Seems like. Do you know who founded Horse Hill? Back in the way back?
Native Americans, right?
Yeah. You know what tribe?
No.
Neither do I. Want to guess why? Because we exterminated them. And if we don't get smart, and if we don't get ruthless, there's not going to be any of us left. Their children won't know our names any more than you or I know who started this town.
But if they're intelligent, if they can be reasoned with, then maybe we can stop this. Maybe we can negotiate. Peace talks or something.
Matt, I'm trying not to freak you out, but you're not understanding what I'm saying. Because the idea that they're just like us, well, that's the worst possible option. We do worse shit than this as training exercises. You want to know the future? Because I've seen it in Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea, Vietnam, all the way back to when we rode in covered wagons and settled the New World. First, it's shock and awe, mass destruction and maximum casualties. Something to scare the locals out of their homes and send them running for the hills. Then, You watch the fleeing refugees. That exposes supply lines, highlights important infrastructure, and most importantly, clears the land out for future development. None of this shit is new. No, we weren't the first ones to do it, and clearly we aren't the last. Just look at Britain, feeding India into a meat grinder so they have shiny rocks to put in their crowns. Look at Spain and South America, Rome and the British Isles, the Mongols and China. As long as mankind has been alive, we've been killing each other with rocks and spears and guns and bombs. In the same way that it shocked the Aztecs to see Spanish ships on the horizon, you and I are shocked to see those things turn Horse Hill into a glue factory. Now, you'd better hope that everybody's wrong. And we'd better pray that those things aren't like us. We'd be better off if they're animals, or what passes for it on whatever godforsaken rock that they come from. Because otherwise, if they're anything like us, then they'll paint the streets with our blood and brains, and then make movies about how sad it made their soldiers. Sorry. I know that's... civilians don't really like to hear that.
Yeah, no shit. So what do? We've got to do something, right? We can't just sit up here like gods on Mount Olympus.
It's called an insurgency. We sit tight, dig in, and make it hurt when they're trying to peel us off. If we make it cost them, assuming they're any good at counting out time and resources, maybe they'll fuck off and leave us alone long enough to rebuild. That's assuming, though, that they don't need our world or its resources, because if they do, then we just got downgraded from a rebellion to an infestation. And in that case, if we're lucky, then we'll get rounded up into farms and bred like cattle. Maybe slaughtered eventually, too, but we'll get to live first. Who knows? Maybe they'll have paid informers to wander through the flock and tell on anyone who tries to get away. In my experience, if you pay off one of the locals for information and pay them off good enough that it's obvious they've been paid, you'll never find yourself at a shortage of rats.
And what if they're just animals?
Well, how often do you hear about peace talks between ants and anteaters?
We were quiet for a long time after that. Thinking of it now, that was the last time he really felt like himself. I could feel him tensing up as we sat on the roof and watched the world burning, heard his breathing quicken and caught his shoulders slump out of the corner of my eye. It was as if the reality of his words was catching up with him now that he'd said them out loud, and soon enough, his laid-back demeanor had turned twitchy. We didn't move until the sun started to rise. The fires making the horizon glow had turned into pillars of smoke that blotted out the day, and the only movement we saw besides the wind moving through the trees were the tripods striding across a world that was once ours. As we got up to go back down the stairwell, satisfied that we could eat and sleep inside the building and only flee into the mine if one of the machines got too close, Austin squinted down at the winding road. He ran his tongue over his teeth, then looked at me. I followed his eyes back to the road, where a small, solitary figure was walking up the mountain. I jumped up and down and waved my good arm, and after a second, I saw the distant figure's head snap to look at me. They raised a bandaged hand, and as they started walking towards us, Austin elbowed me in the side.
We don't know who that is. We don't know anything about them.
We know they were in town. As the figure walked across the parking lot, I started to make out some details. His clothes were mud-caked and wrinkly, and his hair was covered in soot and dried to his neck and forehead. His exhausted face stretched into a smile as he approached.
Oh, I cannot tell you how much of a relief it is to see a human face.
I know what you mean. You're Cooper, right? The guy looking at the town water?
Well, I was. You two don't happen to have any food, do you? Or bandages? My hand is... Well, at this point, I'm just hoping I can keep all my fingers.
Tell him no.
What?
Send him away. We don't need a freeloader.
Austin, we could be killing him.
Yeah, and he could kill us.
Jesus Christ. We've got a first aid kit and some canned food and snacks from a busted vending machine. Come on in. We'll be down to meet you in a minute.
We don't need another mouth to feed.
You saved me.
You're my friend, Matt. I don't know him.
A few minutes later, we sat in the break room eating cold soup out of cans. Cooper and I sat across from each other at the small table, while Austin leaned against the wall nearby, eyeing Cooper's back as I asked him questions.
No, it's... they're arthropods. Or at least the shells are. And they're kind of, I don't know, squishy on the inside. Those white things are like octopi.
You sound like you've seen them up close.
Oh, I did. One of them almost burned my hand off. I saw some things yesterday that'll stay with me until I die. I was there when that one in the crater... God.
The crater by the diner? My girlfriend is a waitress there. Did anyone make it?
I don't know. I ran. I think she was with us when it hatched. Her and I and Ogilvy.
Is she alive?
I don't know. But everything in town is... There's these vines everywhere with little ones inside, like strings of salmon eggs that grow like weeds. The whole town's overgrown now. Soon, it'll be the world. Hey, is there a shower in here?
As Cooper washed himself up, Austin took the rest of the food down into Sea Shaft, arguing with me the whole time. Sure, we only had enough for maybe a week if we tightened our belts, but what were we supposed to do? Let Cooper starve so that we could live 2 days longer? Without a more permanent solution, we were dead anyway. But Austin told me he had a plan, and I trusted him. For the rest of the day, the three of us scavenged what supplies we could from inside the destroyed cars littering the parking lot. There wasn't much. That night, we laid down on blankets in the break room and tried to sleep. Soon, Cooper was snoring, and when Austin thought I was asleep, I heard him get up and leave the room, then listened to the sound of the elevator going down. When I woke up in the morning, he was still gone. I left Cooper sleeping and went to check on Austin. I found him coming up on the elevator as I approached and waited at the top to see what he would say. He just looked at me, nodded, and left the room. The next few days were quiet and strange. Cooper did his best to contribute, while Austin had fits of cold sweats and sudden bursts of anger. I wasn't sure if it was the stress or if his previous drinking had been more of a reliance than a hobby, but as the days wore on, I could tell he needed a drink. When he slept, he would toss and turn, and whenever I would wake up, he'd be gone, down in Shaft C doing whatever it was he did down there. On the 4th, or maybe the 5th day, as the supplies ran low, the three of us ventured down the hill to the nearest house, hoping the heavy woods would keep us out of the sight of the tripods. We stuck to the ditches along the side of the winding mountain road and didn't see anything alive until we got to the first driveway down. There, at the end of a long stretch of gravel, a ramshackle house sat with a screen door swinging in the breeze. A few scattered items of clothing, along with deep tire tracks that swerved off the gravel, into the mud, and back onto the driveway, gave us the impression that no one was home. Whoever owned it, or used to own it, they must have left in a hurry. There was food in the pantry, some boxes and cans, but nothing was salvageable from the fridge with the power off. While Cooper and I packed up as much as we could carry, Austin tore through every shelf and cabinet he could find in search of liquor. The most he found was a couple warm six-packs of piss-cheap beer. That night, Austin seemed to relax a little, and when it got dark, the three of us sat on the roof and tried to pretend the world could go back to the way it was. Cooper took out a pack of cards he had found at the house, and as the world sat empty all around us, on the brink of man's extinction, we actually played games. But in the early hours of the morning, when he thought I was asleep, Austin still disappeared into Shaft C. I waited for 10 or 15 minutes, then followed him, hoping he had moved far enough into the shaft that he wouldn't hear the elevator coming back up. When I found him in one of the tunnels, he was sitting against the wall with his legs splayed out in front of him and crushed beer cans scattered around his feet. Next to him, a shovel was embedded in the floor, and nearby, a discarded pickaxe was almost black with coal dust. Austin?
What?
Is this what you've been doing down here?
I'm taking a break. I can't work all the time, can I?
Work on what?
Can you keep a secret?
From who?
Cooper, that little snake. He knows something, Matt. He's hiding something. Do you remember what I said about sellouts? The kind of people that'll betray their own kind?
What?
We can't trust him, Matt. Not if we're gonna stop those things.
Stop?
Don't you remember anything? An insurgency, Matt. Us against the Martians. But if those things even see us, we're dead, right? They think they've beat us, but it's just the beginning. There's gotta be more survivors out there, right? We just can't find them. So I've been thinking, we've got to go underground. Not just here, but everywhere. In the sewers. The rain will clear them out, and without humans up above to make them dirty again, we've got miles and miles of space to build.
To build what?
A brave new world, buddy. Houses and schools and banks and supermarkets. We'll start all over again, right under their noses, right under their feet. I mean, how have we been doing living up there? Piss fucking bore, if you want my opinion. But we've got a chance now. A real chance to build a better future for the next generation of mankind. We'll go down into the town for some books, math and science, none of that poems and literature bullshit. And we'll teach everyone to build generators, get the human spirit moving again. And then, one day, when we're tough enough, we'll take over one of those machines. Learn how to make it ourselves, and then go to goddamn war. Paint the town red, white, and fucking blue with their alien guts, and keep rolling to the next town over. Give it 20, maybe 30 years, and we can beat the fuckers at their own game. We can be the underdogs again. America can be... We can be beautiful, man. No more wage slave bullshit, no more politicians and stupid shitty taxes, just rebels coming out of their holes to fuck up the evil goddamn empire. Red fucking dawn, Matt. You and me and anyone else who wants to give those three-legged freaks a couple of black eyes. What do you say? Are you with me? My tunnel's facing the right direction. We keep digging, in a couple of months we'll meet up with the sewers at the edge of town.
I looked past him as he gestured back to a waist-high tunnel stretching 10 or 15 feet into the wall of the shaft. It was barely enough space to crawl in, and it had taken him a week to dig. I could have dug that much in a day. As I looked back at Austin, his eyes wild and face streaked with coal dust, I suddenly became acutely aware of the distance between his dreams and reality. I silently stared, trying desperately to think of something to say, but before I could say anything, I heard distant echoing footsteps in the tunnel behind me.
You guys down here?
It's Cooper.
Shh! Don't let him hear you.
What are you... He knows we're down here. Where else would we be? Over here!
No!
Hey, there you are. What's going on? Oh, you drank all the beer. Rude.
We should probably talk about this some other time. Why don't we all just go back up to...
Why'd you follow us? Planning on selling us out to the squids?
I don't know what you're... God, Jesus! Get away from me, you psycho!
Austin, let go of him.
He's hiding something, Matt, and if he won't tell me what, then I'm gonna beat it out of him.
Austin moved to punch Cooper again, and I jumped in, shouldering him into the wall of the shaft as Cooper toppled over. Austin pushed off the wall and backhanded me, almost taking me off of my feet, and when I turned my head back, he was already on top of me. My head bounced off the shaft wall as Austin grunted angrily, punching me in the gut, and I saw Cooper scrambling to help me as I struggled to breathe. In the space of a second, 3 civilized people had become cavemen. Cooper grabbed Austin around the shoulders, then turned to protect himself as Austin threw his head back to try and break his nose. I kicked Austin in the groin, then sprang forward and tackled him to the floor. He bolted up and jabbed at my broken arm, then broke free with a sudden, powerful thrust while I was wincing, and shot up to grab Cooper in a headlock. He kneed him in the back of his legs and forced him to the ground, tightening his grip as Cooper gasped for air.
What are you hiding? What do you know?
I don't know what you're talking about. I am... All right. Just let me... In Horse Hill, in the red weed, there was a ring. I saw someone wearing it at the diner. I don't remember who. It could have been.
Okay?
If I said something, you might have... I don't know what you would have done. At first, when I saw it, those things, I didn't think I wanted to live anymore. But there's some animal part of me that wouldn't let me just die. And then I found you. And I could have starved, but you saved me. And I didn't. I couldn't.
Let me kill him, Matt, before he confesses to anything else. Who knows what he did to survive down there?
That's all! I swear to God, that's all! You can't kill me! I didn't do anything! I didn't hurt anyone! I didn't...
Kay doesn't wear any rings.
What?
I had to ask her mother for her size before I went to the jeweler's. It couldn't have been hers. Cooper swung an elbow back into Austin's side and scrambled away. On instinct, I moved myself between them as Austin dove for a rock. He grabbed one and whirled, ready to crack my skull, and I flinched. I waited, eyes closed, for the hit to connect. And after a few seconds, I opened my eyes again. Austin stepped back, lowering the rock in his hand, and glowered, glancing back and forth between Cooper and me as we tried to catch our breaths. Blood was running down the side of Austin's mouth, and a bruise was starting to form around Cooper's throat. My ribs felt like they were on fire, and pain was radiating up from my arm in its sling. Is this your brave new world, Ace? Because it seems a hell of a lot like the old one to me. As old as it gets.
Get out of here. Both of you. If you're not gonna help, just go.
You gonna kill us when we turn our backs?
You know me better than that.
I'm not sure I ever knew you at all. Cooper and I started down the tunnel back towards the elevator, and as we went, Austin's shadow danced on the walls around us from his discarded flashlight.
You can't say no to me. I'm the future. Don't you understand? The world needs people like me, not weak little cowards who aren't willing to do what it takes. You hear me? You don't stand a chance against those things. Where are you gonna go?
Not to your world, pal. On the surface, Cooper and I gathered what we could carry and said our goodbyes. He thought he might travel along the mountains, see if anyone else had made a go at survival in the tree-covered hills. If not, he'd peel off and head for the highway, try and find whatever became of the refugees from Wheeling and anywhere else around. I told him I was going to go down into Horse Hill, and although he begged me not to, he understood. Even if Kay was dead, even if there was nothing left, I had to know. And more than that, if all hope was lost, if the only one thinking of the future was an alcoholic washout from the U.S. Army, then there was no reason to keep fighting. I'd rather be dead than alive in a world without Kay. Down the road, a mile or two from town, were tangles of the red weed, looped around trees or draped over fallen telephone poles like tendons of an unfurled heart. But instead of the vibrant, sticky crimson Cooper had described, they were dull, almost gray, and flaked away to dust under my shoes as I stepped over them. When I came over the hill closest to the edge of town, I stopped and stared at it through the rising sun. The town of Horse Hill had been annihilated. All that remained of the streets were half-collapsed buildings covered in dark red tangles, dried out and cracking as they lost their color. There were bodies, only partially visible underneath where the vines had receded, and melted cars lined the narrow streets that I followed towards the diner on the other side of the park. I turned the corner and froze. Where the grass should have started sat a gigantic pit, with red weeds spilling out from within. The buildings at the edge of the park had collapsed into the crater as the ground had been pulled out from under them, and I hardly recognized the sign for the diner in the pile of twisted rebar, broken bricks, and shattered glass smothered underneath crisscrossing tendons of red. That was it then. Nothing to live for. All that was left was finding a place to die. I stepped to the edge of the pit and looked inside. At the bottom, a gigantic bulb sat deflated in a lake of thick red liquid. On the crimson lake surface, countless white, boneless shapes bobbed lifelessly. A cloud split in the sky above me, and sunlight shined down, outlining the shadow of one of the tripods across the clearing, and I turned to squint up at it. The towering machine stood completely still, looming over me like a vengeful god. Its tree trunk legs stretched out beneath it, their pointed ends lodged through concrete to stick it in place, and the single lens at the front of its massive skull face glinted in the early morning light. I lifted my good hand to block out the sun. There were shapes around the thing's head, circling and twirling in drunken spirals. I squinted. They were birds.
It's down here! Look at me! Come on! Move, you piece of shit! Kill me! Do it! Just do it. Please.
The alien war machine didn't move. I squinted harder, staring at the birds, and realized suddenly what it was they were doing. As each one swooped down, they pulled a piece of stringy white flesh up and off of an unseen shape and soared back into the sky to swallow it. My eyes scanned the tripod. Between the seams of black, glimmering armor, bits of pale, sickly flesh had sagged inward. It was dead. I looked back at the birds. The thing inside must have tried to crawl out, made it as far as the top before it died, and now it was being picked apart. I looked out past the pit at the dead town of Horse Hill. I could see another unmoving tripod a few streets over, and a third that had collapsed through a water tower. Both were surrounded by clouds of circling birds.
Matt?
I turned and saw Kay, dirty and ragged, but no worse for wear. She stepped out from beneath part of a collapsed building, and I could see the shapes of other survivors moving out of the shadows and into the morning light behind her. I ran to her, and she ran to me, and as soon as we embraced, we both started to cry. For a few minutes, it was all we did.
I thought you were dead.
I'm here. You're safe. You're okay. We made it. The months we've spent rebuilding haven't been easy, but every night, Kay and I hold each other close, thinking about how lucky we are. And every time I hold her hand, or she holds mine, and I run my fingertip along the ring on her finger, we think about how it was when we each counted the other among the dead. To this day, no one really knows where the things came from, why they got sick, or why it took some weeks to die and others months. But I can say with confidence that Horse Hill holds the American record. Hell, the world record. Here, the bastards lasted 6 days, 19 hours, and 53 minutes. No one really knows for sure what got them, but folks around town like to say that not even Martians can drink Horse Hill water. Not even after it's filtered through a man or 10 men or 100. After all, nothing survives in Horse Hill. Why should they? War of the Worlds Part 3 was written and directed by Jonathan Inbody, and adapted from the novel The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. It was edited by Jeffrey Lavin, with music composed and performed by Samantha Hunt. Matt, the narrator, was played by Jonathan Inbody. Kay was played by Samantha Hunt, and Austin was played by Andy Rich. Foreman Sayers was played by Sean C. Sanders, the mine worker was played by Eric Miller, and Cooper was played by Justin Pope.
Gray Matter is a Word Search Media production. Any similarities to real people, places, or things is purely coincidental. Be kind. Rewind.